Earlier, technology failed us there and we got cut off just as we were continuing with our discussions with Nomvula Mokonyane, the Minister for Communications, who had come straight out of her budget vote earlier in Parliament. But before I could get to the issues that came out of her budget speech and the debate that followed, I wanted to pick up on something she said earlier at a briefing where she said Cabinet reiterates its condemnation of violence against women and children and calls on all of us in our respective formations to take a stand in stopping violence against women. And the question I was going to ask you, Minister, before that technological glitch was what the conversations were like within Cabinet when you were discussing this issue. I see what came out as a statement on it, but just to give us a sense as to how the conversations went, the sort of issues you were raising as members of the executive.
Three things that came out. The first one was the concern of the killings that have just been going on against young women and in many instances by the people that they know, and in this instance having relationships with them. The second one was the issues around victim support, so that then victims cannot actually feel and should never feel vulnerable as possible secondary victims again after being attacked and go into our institutions and not get the necessary support, or the use of material benefits and material influence and positions by the perpetrators of abuse. The third issue was the reiterance that it doesn't matter as to who the perpetrator is. We definitely as a nation have to unite and frown upon any form of abuse, and where individuals have a particular responsibility in the public, those that have deployed them and those that are holding them accountable must deal with such perpetrators.
Did you have any discussion, one would hope a deep and wide one, around the responsibilities that your respective cabinet colleagues have when it comes to dealing with this issue? In other words, if we accept that the problem is not abating, what did the Minister of Police, for example, have to say? What did the Minister responsible for women, for example, have to say? And what did the minister who's holding the purse, have to say about the resources that need to be put into this particular area?
That's why I raised the issue of victim support, the issues around the independence and self-reliance of women. And that's why also I raised the issues around accountability, including consequence management in this regard. What I will not be in a position to do, Vuyo, is to then go on to a detail of saying so and so said this. Cabinet pronounces on the decisions taken, but almost all of us in Cabinet, those who were in attendance, we all agreed in unison that we must cap this. We must be decisive. It does not only depend on policing, it must also deal with societal issues that contribute to this, because in many instances police come at the tail end, but where they are, the criminal justice system must become intolerant.
But also, I suppose, as public representatives, you should be leading by example.
Of course, that's exactly what we're saying. No one must be absolved from taking responsibility, young and old, public representatives or a priest or somebody who's just an ordinary unemployed young man, and hence the development and conscientization of the boy child and the girl child on how to respect one another becomes very important. Those of us who are matured, we must also begin to respect the vulnerable and do away with all these other things that lead to the vulnerability of the girl child and women, particularly at the hands of people that they know.
Let's turn our attention to a couple of issues that came out of your budget vote in Parliament, where you've just come from, Minister, starting with that albatross around your neck, digital migration. Now, we are several years behind. We are down there with, the richest country on the continent, down there with some of the poorest and least resourced countries on the continent. How are we going to meet the 2019 deadline? And I'm talking here at a very, very practical level, given that, 2019 is just around the corner.
There is no way that South Africa will reach and meet the target of June 2019 if we're going to rely on the fiscus. And that's why it will only be through partnerships. We've already started interacting with our partners in the private sector, our partners in the research sector, our young people, young smart minds, and we do believe that that with the work that we have started to do, we'll be able to open up and make sure that this is rolled out in a manner that does not only have it being implemented through funding coming from the fiscus. And we're quite sure that within a period of 10 days, we'll be sharing with South Africans on the kind of way forward that we'll be putting together. Otherwise, if it is going to be solely dependent on how government works, it will never be realized, because there's no country that rolled out this digital migration in the way that South Africa has done it. It is not viable, it is not sustainable. We need the private sector, we need innovation, we need to adapt and make sure that we use all means that are advanced, and also there can be sustainability through a maintenance plan.
But how much responsibility are you prepared to take, given that, most of the problems were actually caused by your predecessors, not so much by being overly independent on the fiscus? It was conscious decisions that they took, many of them for very selfish interests.
Vuyo, it is precisely because of that that together with National Treasury as well as the Department of Telecommunication, we are saying we need to move away from our implementation plan, because yes, we have embraced the policy of moving towards a digital migration in a manner that is going to be comprehensive. The issue that has been a challenge is how it has been implemented, and we do believe that now, with us going out to partner with other alternative role players, we will actually make the process much more faster. However, it can only happen if there is that kind of partnership and a commitment by government to ensure that there's sustainability beyond just the connection.
Another issue, of course, you spoke about was what you called a negative attitude towards paying SABC license fees. What did you mean by that?
SABC is rendering a very important service, and it is a service that requires resourcing. We do believe that the culture of non-payment of services is a culture that we must actually outgrow as a nation. It can also happen if the SABC itself creates better systems and methods of being smart with regard to the collection of licenses, and it is also accessible, but of importance that all of us South Africans must also understand that for better quality viewership and listenership, for better content that is required, and for promoting unity and social cohesion, we must also make a meaningful contribution. And it is that we must now turn into a positive, because South Africans also need to see something new. They need a wow, they need a better content, they need new images and new people and young smart minds, including what will inspire South Africans for the future.
But Minister, we've seen what has been happening at the SABC over the years. It hasn't just been an issue of them not being, not having the best collecting methods of collecting licenses. It's got to do with the fact that there were people who were lining up their pockets or lining up the pockets of their friends. It's got to do with the fact that the SABC has not been able to actually do what people there are capable of doing, but are being held back by the politicians who lean on them, or by the some cruel business people, unscrupulous business people who are actually using them. Those have been the issues more so than the actual methods of collecting. And I'm sure South Africans would be happy to pay if they were getting best, value for money.
For your fellow South Africans, including yourselves, we should appreciate that now there is a new board that has been able to pick up the pieces from the interim board that was appointed. There is a roadmap towards repositioning the South African Broadcasting Corporation. We are working very close with the board. And there's also been an appointment of people at the executive level. Very soon there will be an announcement on the appointment of a new CFO, and there is a roadmap towards the appointment and filling of the post for a group CEO. We are also looking at the issues of bringing young smart minds and dealing also with the historical issues, working together with the National Treasury. And you also have the law enforcement agencies that are following up on other issues that had come out of the inquiry. And all these issues are running concurrent. We definitely have to give the new board the support. We must hold them accountable, and most importantly, we must make sure that the state has got the capacity to exercise oversight. And of course, the issues around moving away SABC 1, 2, 3 from platforms that are actually costly to the viewer, as well as looking at the sporting rights. These are the things that we are working on together with the board. I am quite hopeful that through Parliament, as well as through our oversight capacity, we will be able to share with South Africans the progress and the future SABC that we want.
Minister, thank you very much for coming through this evening. The Minister of Communications, of course, straight from here, a budget vote debate in Parliament.